Zoom Buzz Media chat. 2 weeks ago, you'd have seen me in the hot seat being interviewed by Joe Abba. Today, it's my turn to ask the questions, and I've been very pleased to invite Lulu Ngwanakilala, who is with us. I hope you can see both of us. So we'll come to introducing Lulu in a moment, but let me first say a little bit about Buzz Media and the show that we're on today. So Buzz on Earth Media is the leading media hub dedicated to mainstreaming sustainability, wellness, and coexistence. We're a one-stop shop for sustainability stories, innovations, thought leadership, and eco-friendly brands. With our audience in 190 plus countries, 7,800 plus cities, and growing every day, we are defining sustainability as the new growth imperative. Buzz on Earth is rated among the top 10 sustainability YouTube channels globally, and #1 from India for 2020. Buzz on Earth also ranks in the top 30 sustainability blogs in a global listing by FeedSpot ratings. So thank you everybody for joining this show. You said we have Lulu Ngwanakilala with us. My name is Oliver Blake, and we're going to be talking about justice and sustainable development. Now, I came to Tanzania 2 years ago, and so we're both of us here in Tanzania. I've traveled around the country a bit, and I've seen the work of the Legal Services Facility, the organization which Lulu is in charge of. I was very impressed by the groups around the country working hard for justice and people's rights. Lulu took over the organization about a year ago, has impressed me hugely with her leadership, wisdom, and commitment. And that's why I've asked her to come on this program and talk about these questions of justice and sustainable development. And of course, for those of us in Tanzania, today is Nyerere Day. So maybe, Lulu, over to you to say a word. And maybe you can also tell us a little bit about Nyerere Day and why Tanzania celebrates Nyerere Day.
Yes, thank you, Oliver, and thank you very much for the brief introduction. Thank you also for identifying me as somebody that might be able to speak about justice and development. Just to say a little bit about Nyerere Day. So we in Tanzania, every year on the 14th of October, we celebrate Nyerere Day. And the reason that we celebrate Nyerere Day is we want to remember our founding father, Julius Kambarage Nyerere, who was the first Tanzanian president who was the person who fought for Tanzanian independence and was what we call the father of the nation. Why that's very important is that Nyerere is the first leader in Tanzania who took Tanzania from a country that was under colonialism into an independent country. But also Nyerere did not only fight for Tanzania's independence. Nyerere believed in Pan-Africanism, so fought really hard to ensure independence of other African countries. Nyerere also believed in unification of Tanzania and Tanzanians. And the reason we believe as Tanzanians, the reason why we are known as being a very peaceful country is because of Nyerere. The reason Nyerere wanted to unite Tanzanians using the language Swahili. So Tanzania has 160 or 138? I can't remember the figures, but a lot of tribes. But Tanzania also has, and all these tribes have their own individual cultures and traditions and languages, but we're all united by the Swahili language. So every Tanzanian, no matter which part of the country comes from, speaks language. we also have religious groups, very strong, either Muslim or Christian groups as the main religions in Tanzania, plus others, but those are the main ones. But that does not divide us at all. We're all united by the language. So he had a vision of how we would be united. We're really proud to say that we have not had a civil war. We had a brief encounter with Uganda during the Idi Amin era, but it was very brief. But we've never had sort of any civil unrest within the country, a little bit in Zanzibar in 2000 during the elections. But as a country, we are known for being a peaceful country, and we credit that all to Nyerere. Nyerere also brought socialism, and there are a lot of pros and cons, but I think the fact that we're united as a nation is accredited to Nyerere. And free education up to university level, that was also part of Nyerere's legacy as well. So and he was a very charismatic leader. For me, that's what I can remember about Nyerere. Extremely charismatic. He had a lot of wisdom, and until today we remember some of his teachings. We call him Mwalimu in Tanzania because he was, apart from being the father of the nation, but also taught us a lot of what we know today. So we try and live by some of his teachings and some of his ideals, although not all of them, but some of them that have brought us to where we are today. So I think that's all I can say about Nyerere Day for now. I might go on forever. I'm a bit patriotic, so I can go on forever. Yes.
Yeah, it's a really interesting, important legacy, particularly this history of peace. And clearly, as someone coming into Tanzania from outside, you can see that legacy and the respect that people still have for him, and a lot of what he did.
Yes.
But let's come to you now, Lulu.
Just to add one more thing I forgot, which is really important. For an African leader, he was the first, and I don't know if there's any other leader who actually stepped down, was not forced to resign, was not kicked out, there was no coup, there was nothing like that. He decided himself that it's time for me to step down and let others rule. And that's another legacy that he left.
Yeah, that's really, really important. It's a really good point. Let's come to you, Lulu, to people to learn a bit more about you before we come on to some of the other questions. Because you have a background in law, and I think you studied law in Dar es Salaam and in Liverpool in the UK. But you, if I'm right, you haven't sort of practiced as a lawyer. You've been working in civil society for all, if not most, of your career, leading a number of civil society organizations that work on development issues. So what motivated you to follow that path rather than sort of become a practicing lawyer?
Yeah, thank you for that, Oliver. So for me, going into law is a decision that I had made a long time ago. I actually made the decision before I even went to university. I decided I would study law. I think I was in what we call Form 3 here, and you probably call it grade 10 in the UK. And the reason, I think I've always been passionate about human rights and people's rights. And the reason I decided to do that is because at some point during my secondary education, I realized that there are groups of people that somehow are vulnerable or marginalized, and they don't really have a voice. And I said to myself that when I grow up, I want to study law. And the reason why I want to study law is because I want to speak for these groups of people who don't have a voice, who don't have anyone to speak for them. So I knew early on that I would study law. So the choices that I made were towards that. And when I went to University of Dar es Salaam, I decided that I would do a law degree, but I would also, I already made a decision to do a master's in international law and human rights because that's where I wanted my focus to be. Um, I do love, I think I'm really passionate about the law in general, and I think I probably would have made a very good litigant or a very good lawyer, because somebody reminded me recently that I used to be the champion when it came to moot court, what we call moot court competitions in Africa. I also did the same when I was in Liverpool. We did the European court, and I was very good at that as well. But my passion has always been to serve the community. So for me, moving into development or going towards the development sector felt like the right move to do, to make, in order to be able to work directly with the community at large and not take on individual cases. And we don't really, here in Tanzania and maybe in Africa, human rights is not, in terms of legal practice, it's not really that much of a legal practice. You don't really go to court to fight human rights cases, but you see human rights when it comes to people's rights and access to justice and things like that. So for me, it was really important to address issues that groups in the community were tackling with, and use my knowledge to support, to work on that. And also policy and legal reforms and legal review that will then have an impact on the lives of the larger community. Yeah.
Thank you. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Of course, your move into development, working for a number of development organizations. Of course, you are now working on a sort of legal development organization, which I guess sort of brings everything together in that sense. If we think back to development and law, a lot of people think about development as infrastructure or basic services such as education or health or water. But you've obviously got a focus in LSF at least, but more broadly from law, around issues of justice and human rights. How do you see the issues of justice and human rights as part of sustainable development and protecting the environment? What's the connection between them? Why do these things matter to you when other people would say development is about education or building roads? Why justice and human rights? Why are they so important?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I remember when I started my journey in development, I didn't start off doing justice and the human rights directly. I worked for a number of development-based organizations and community social issues, a number of social issues. It's very interesting that now I'm doing exactly what I set out to do, which is human rights and access to justice within the community. I think it's really important, not just as a how can I say it? Not just as this intangible issue that you have to deal with, but a real issue that people struggle with. I strongly believe that you can't have, there isn't an area of our lives that is not touched by access to justice. So you can, I see access to justice as very holistic in terms of it touches every aspect of our everyday life. There is no way that you can talk about education without talking about access to justice. You cannot talk about health. You cannot talk about even the infrastructure, because you're talking about people's livelihoods, you're talking about people's well-being, you're talking about the communities that are affected by whatever it is that is happening. So just as we think that it is important to have proper infrastructure, to have proper people to receive education at all levels, it is at the same time very important for the community to have access to justice in terms of their rights, human rights, because if, for example, I am a girl child, and there are communities until today where it is not as important to send a girl child to school as it is important to send a boy child to school. So this girl child, if there is no one there to basically fight for her right to education, she will not go to school. There will be education as an area of development, which is really important, but if there is nobody to talk about why it's important for this girl child, and to give the girl child equal opportunities to go to school, then the girl child will not go to school. And we know what happens if she doesn't go to school. We have communities where girls get married, early marriages. A girl is, I remember I was in primary school, and I studied in a very good school. It was a government school, but a good school in Dar es Salaam, Oyster Bay Primary. And I remember we were in grade 5, and this girl, I think she was about 12, and her parents pulled her out of school, and they went to get her married. And I was really shocked. And I think this is the first time I realized that it is possible for things like that to happen. So if we don't address such issues, if we don't give it the prominence that it deserves, we might have education, but we might not have equality in education. So then we might have a section or a group in our society community that might not be allowed to have the same rights as another section in the community. And I think for me, if you ask me why human rights are so important, why is it so important to me? It's exactly that there are people within our communities that are not afforded the same rights, basic rights, as everybody else, for one reason or another. And this is why it's important. And it is as important as all the other development issues. You cannot have one without the other. It's important to have the infrastructure, yes. It's important that we have education and health systems, but it's also important that people have the rights to access those other development, the sectors, whatever it is we've put in place, that people have equal access as well.
Yes, seems to me that if you don't have the justice and you don't have that respect for rule of law, then the sort of more wealthy and privileged in society will always have what they need. But
yes,
those in society who risk being left out or marginalized, the poorer in society, then without justice, then they won't be benefiting from society as a whole or from what the government has to offer. Is that how you see it? That it's really about making sure that everybody gets, the fair share of support for development, and there's that equality across the country. Without justice, then you won't have that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I think justice is really important for development. You cannot really talk about development without talking about justice. And justice is also really important for, poverty reduction, for example. And it's not really about rich or poor. It could be in some instances, but I think it's more about within the same community, within a family, within a village, within a society. Does everybody have equal access to services that are available to them? Do they, or can they have the same rights as the other person, as the next person? For example, we have seen cases within LSF, and even before I was at LSF, where where a father would need I don't know, somehow economically they would not have enough money, or they would not have produced enough to be able to have enough money to 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 continue to do whatever they need to do. And they would look around and they would say, oh, I have a little girl, she's just sitting at home, I will marry her off, I'll get paid a certain amount for marrying her off, and then I can then have the money to do whatever it is I want to do. Now, just for the girl herself, first of all, to have the self-determination, the understanding that she has a right not to be married off, for example, or not to be taken out of school, or not to be, like she herself can decide what she wants for her own life. And then and sometimes this happen not because people set out um, to to abuse somebody else's rights. It happens because someone feels that's the only thing there is to do, and maybe there is nothing wrong with doing what I'm doing. So we've had cases where you would approach the parent and say, do you know that your daughter should be in school? Do you know that she has a right to this? And do you know that there are other means of you generating income apart from getting her married off? And do you know that she might have a future that maybe might be able to help you and your family later on in life, or that she deserves to have her own life and her own future? So even we call it legal education, that for either the father or the child or the community in general is really important, for people to understand that we all have equal rights, the basic human rights, that if we're talking about the rule of law, then we should also talk about basic human rights. What we take for granted as a right, for example, I have a right to shelter, I have a right to go to school, I have a right to um, um, uh, basic things that we take for granted. There are communities that are not even don't have access to that. So that is why it's important. And if a person or a group of people are denied their basic rights, then they can't fully participate in economic development. And this is where the link is. You cannot expect somebody who has been denied the basic rights to be able to go out and be fully participate in economic development, even personal economic development, not just the national economic development. You want everybody to be empowered enough to be able to carry out their own economic development, but then contribute to the national development as well at the same time, and poverty reduction. So this is where I see the role of access to justice. If there is land grabbing, if there is gender-based violence, if there is economic hardships, if there is, people don't feel that they have access to the basic needs that they should that they should have access to, then you have an issue where they cannot fully participate. And if they're not fully participating, then how do you then achieve your goals when you're trying to have development of the community, the society, the nation, and you want everybody to fully participate? So it becomes very difficult.
Yes, no, it certainly does. Reminds me of one of the themes we touched on with Joaba about empowerment, how important empowering people is as part of the development agenda. It sounds like you would agree with that. I know we often use this term sort of capacity building, which is a sort of very development sort of technical focused term. But this issue of sort of empowerment and capacity building, how would you describe it? And again, how important would you see that? in this story.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, sometimes the terms can feel disempowering as well. Capacity building, are we saying that, we're trying to give capacity to people who have no capacity? Or so it is important, and it's important to look at it from the point of view that we are supporting, or we are strengthening the capacity, or improving what is already there, so that we can have, people can realize their full potential. Let me put it that way. So I see it as a tool to address dependency issues, as a tool to basically ensure that people, communities, organizations are able to fully become sustainable, and they're able to carry on their work without having to rely heavily on the support of somebody else. And so what capacity gaps, or what needs does the individual, the organization, the institution have that we can address together, so that they then can get to a place where they can say that now we're fully independent and do not need any more support. So I think it's really important to look at, and this can be contextualized, and I don't believe one size fits all. I think it depends on the institution, organization, community. It depends on where they are, what is important to them, and how they learn. People learn in different ways. You might want to. It should not be so prescriptive, in the sense that we're coming in to build your capacity because you don't have capacity. It should be that we understand, from the assessment we have done together, we have both identified these are the gaps, and we have the tools and maybe the resources to support you to identify, to address those gaps within a certain period of time. And then we can review and evaluate and see whether that has been successful or not. And if it has, then you will find that institutions then are able to say, okay, now we're fully independent and sustainable. Although it's not how can I say, it's not a definite answer to sustainability. Is not, you can say now I'm here, finally reached. I think it's a process, it's a journey. You will get to it at some point, but at least the independence to feel that okay, now I know exactly what I'm doing, and I can do it myself, maybe with a little bit of support, but not as much support. So I think it's a huge achievement and a success if you can say that you have been working with organizations that maybe at your baseline, at the beginning of when you started working with the organizations, they felt or they identified a number of issues that they had, and through working together, this journey of building capacity and identifying the gaps and addressing those gaps, you have reached a point now where you can say we're comfortable with where we are at the moment. And I remember we had this year, we have been working with quite a lot of local community-based organizations for some time now. And I remember every time we meet with the organizations, we talk about sustainability, we talk about being self-reliant, we talk about income generation, we talk about different ways that organizations are able to run themselves. And we had a meeting this year where we brought together, I think maybe a month, 2 months ago, where we brought together all these organizations. And one thing that came out that for me that was very interesting is hearing it from them saying that we feel at the moment we're 80% sustainable, that we're almost there, that we have reached a point now where we can compete with any other organization at the national level in terms of generating our own income, in terms of having the structures, which is really important, both governance structures, management structures, but even in terms of implementation that are strong enough for us to be able to have that credibility to show that we can do this work ourselves. And also being able to access funds that they could not access in the past, that resources that can enable them to carry out their work within their communities without relying on somebody else. And for me, as much as you talk about it a lot, and as much as you put these systems in place, and you follow up, and you monitor, and you do mentoring, and you do coaching, and you do monitoring, you do a lot of things, but to actually hear it coming from them and not from us saying, you're now sustainable, you're now, independent, you can run your own organization, them saying, no, we want to be let go. And I laughed, and I said, actually, that was the goal. That was the goal. We're happy when organizations are at a point where they feel that they want to be let go. That is a huge success. It's an achievement, and we should clap for ourselves. We should applaud ourselves. We have reached that goal that we wanted to achieve. So to be able to get to a point where it becomes clearly apparent that, and not from you, but from the beneficiary, that we are where we wanted to be, not where you wanted to be, but where we wanted to be. That's really important. And oftentimes I think it is prescribed, it is imposed, and it is the impact of it is very difficult to see. And it's really important that you somehow find out whether what you have done or have been doing all these years has had any impact on the people, the community, the institutions that you have been working with. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you make that point very well, Lulu, that it's not, capacity building is not something you come in and do to people. It's something that people, a process they have to own themselves, understand where they are, where they want to get to, and then they can benefit from the support you provide. And it's great to hear people saying, exactly, yeah, we're sustainable, we've done it, you can go and help somebody else now. And that's wonderful.
Yeah.
It's really nice to to hear that. I've got some questions here on the Q&A. I'm just going to pick one, which I think links back this question of justice to sort of what you were saying about Nyerere at the start, and the question around sort of peace. So a question around whether the denial of basic rights to a big enough community, leads to sort of escalating tensions, which can then also have wider political and economic impacts. Do you want to comment on that sort of link between sort of justice and sort of bigger questions around peaceful development?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question, and it's interesting for us here in Tanzania. And I think a lot of times, if you're an outsider, it's very difficult to understand how we think, or how, I think it's always the interpretation of that is different. Again, it's contextual. For Tanzania, we have been a socialist country for so long. We then moved on into, a mix, a transition into capitalism, into, different kind of economies. So what people term, or what people see as in other contexts as the economic, political, or even what we term as human rights, again, or the link between that and peaceful societies, it's very difficult it's very different here in Tanzania. First of all, we are a society that, as we spoke about when we were talking about Nyerere, has always been peaceful. So even the thought that we might have tensions in Tanzania. For a normal Tanzanian like myself, it doesn't even cross my mind. It is not something that we think about. I don't think we're capable of it in Tanzania, to be honest with you. I can't see Tanzanians running the streets, and it's not in us. It is just not in our nature. So we're not that kind of society. So when you think about these things, you have to see it from our own eyes, from our lenses, and the way we see it in Tanzania as well. And unfortunately, I think sometimes when people talk about human rights, they focus a lot on issues that affect a certain group or a certain parts of the community. But for the larger community in Tanzania, when they talk about human rights, they are talking about their basic rights. And as far as those are concerned, somebody reminded me, I think whether, I'm not sure that was this year, last year, somebody reminded me and said, you know, people forget that in human rights, you also have economic rights. And for somebody who for the average citizen, that's what they care about. They care more about that than these freedom of expression and all the other rights that everybody else might be thinking about. For them is, are they able to fully participate economically so that they can feed their family? Are they able to send their child to school? Are they able to get now we have the national health insurance, so that when they're sick, they can be, they can have treatment. So for a country like ours, there are basic rights that are more important to the normal general public. And this is the majority of Tanzanian. We are a country of almost 60 million. Majority of them are not in the city. Majority of them are in the rural areas. For people in the rural areas, they're more worried about the day-to-day, how they survive, than worried about the other issues. And not to say that those other issues are not very important, but it is important to understand the context. And the context is, if you ask them, they will tell you, no, I'm happy because I am now my child can go to school for free because there are these schools that have been built. I'm happy because, we have the national health insurance now. I am happy because, so they look at things very differently. And whether or not you see the human rights and peaceful society, when you look at the overall picture, for the person on the ground, they're happy because their basic rights are met every day, and they focus more on their basic rights. And I personally believe that when we talk about human rights, when I studied human rights, I was not thinking that I will do human rights so that I can 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 tackle this issue or that issue. I thought I would study human rights so that I can see that communities are able to access their basic rights. And as much as it is important that all rights are upheld, but we also have to think about, in a country where we have 60 million people, what what is a normal citizen thinking about? What is important to a person, or in terms of their everyday life? What is a priority for them? And so, yes, and I would say, these questions, when we talk about economic rights and social rights and political rights, in any developing or even developed country, we have the same issues. Every country is grappling with this, and every country will talk about how they're not being upheld. The US will talk about it, the UK will talk about it, China, India, and everywhere else. And we all have issues that we deal with every day. But at the end of the day, I think we should not forget that it is very important to think about that person who is somewhere very far, very remote, does not know what they're going to eat, or how they're going to get to the hospital, or so who is addressing those issues that are really important for the people who are somewhere down there, that they themselves feel that they can't speak for themselves. Who is speaking for this group of people? And I think we should never forget about that. We spend a lot of time debating and talking about who has the best human rights, who doesn't have the best human rights. But what is our definition of human rights? And how do we address human rights in such a way that we talk for and to the person that really needs that support? How do we use our voices to make sure that we are really truly changing people's lives? Even if we're talking about politics, are these politics going to help us to change people's lives? If it's more about so that we can be seen to know the law, and we can be seen to push the law, then we're not really helping the person on the ground. And sometimes we also need to question ourselves in terms of our motivations. Are we really thinking about that person that really needs to access their basic rights? And this is why I think access to justice is really important, because access to justice focuses on the everyday. This person, how do we make sure that their needs are met? Because that's important. And if we can use our influence, if we can use our knowledge, our experience, and everything that we've got, so that we can address these systemic issues that can then impact on the lives of the people on the ground, then I think we'll be doing a good job.
Yes, Lulu. Yeah, and thinking about what you said, you mentioned China. I mean, every country follows its own sort of development, social, political model. China is not sort of always seen, from the outside at least, as a sort of model for respect for rule of law. I've never been to China. I don't know. I couldn't comment on what happens there. But what would you say about people who say, maybe rule of law and democracy is not so important? Look at China, a massive economy, millions and millions of people taken out of poverty, now a major world power. How would you respond to those sort of questions?
So that's a very interesting question. I was thinking of that as you're speaking, and I equate that to people who say, there are a number of billionaires, or very successful people in the world that never went to school. Or why is it important to go to school when you can become a billionaire without going to school? Or you can drop out of school and become, a billionaire and very successful in life. I think oftentimes we tend to think that rule of law and human rights are synonymous, that they go together, like it's one and the same. And I think we have to separate the two. What is rule of law, and what is human rights, and what is democracy? And we all have our definitions. And China, as an example, for a very long time, we have heard about the questions being asked about China's human rights history or record, or that China being accused of not having very good human rights record. But when it comes to rule of law, I don't know if we can say the same with China as well, because I also know that there are countries that seem to be seen as leading in terms of democracy and human rights, and but again they're questionable when it comes to rule of law. So it's very difficult to really point a finger when we also know at the same time we also have. I mean, China has proven that they are able to uphold their systems are working in terms of their judiciary, in terms of their, in terms of their if you look at their not at their human rights record, but if you look at their systems and you compare their systems to systems in other countries, then you will see that there's a bit of a discrepancy. And I always hesitate to say that a certain country or a certain nation has a bad record or the worst record, or whichever way, not a very good record, because it depends on the benchmark that you're using to the scale that you use. It also depends on um, what on you as the person that is judging. Where do you place that benchmark? What are you looking at? Because you could be on the one hand, you're talking about issues that you think are maybe you, in terms of what you have placed in your priorities, you've given them the highest level of priority for you. But then so you're looking it through again through your lens, and you're saying they don't have human rights or they don't have rule of law because of ABCD. But if somebody else looks through their lens and looks at you, they might say exactly the same thing based on what they consider to be a priority to them. So we talk at the moment, for example, in developing countries. At some point, I worked with refugees, and I know the issue and asylum seekers, for example. And I know a lot of developed countries that have appalling records when it comes to refugees and asylum seekers and immigration issues. So, and if we want to talk about human rights, we should not limit it. We should then think about the whole span of human rights. People have rights. Everybody has rights. Do we forget that there are groups of people who have these rights as well in these countries that we are not talking about? Right now, we're seeing the wave of what we call racial discrimination, and how certain groups within communities are affected by racial discrimination, and not just affected in a small way, but affected in a major way. People losing lives, people being put in prison, people, these are rights that are being abused. But I think sometimes our standards are skewed. Like we have different standards. Maybe we have double standards. We have different standards for certain societies, and then we have different standards for certain society. And I find it very difficult. I mean, we have elections in Tanzania right now, and sometimes you get people saying, are your elections free and fair? But we also know that there are developed countries that are having elections or are going to have elections, and we don't know if those are going to be free or fair. So who gives one the right to talk about somebody else? Not to say that any of us is doing a good job or a bad job, but why should it be a bad thing when it happens in one society, and it should be an okay thing when it happens in another society? So I think um, um, we know how much China has done to put themselves where they are now, as you pointed out, probably almost leading the global economy. The work that they've put into that getting themselves there. And we know that by doing that, they are also, it also means that maybe they're participating in
Lulu, we lost you.
I disappeared.
It looks like we've you lost you for a moment, Lulu. Yes, yes. Sorry, good, you're back.
Yes. Yeah. So just to conclude on that, I was saying that for us, or for me in particular, it's really important to also focus on what we have in terms of access to justice, what we have, and how that impacts on our economy, on our development, on our poverty reduction, and what role can we play to ensure that we're addressing the issues we have so that we can get to where we want to be. I think sometimes you get to a point where you have the luxury to then start thinking about what everybody else is doing. But when you're not at that point and you have your own your own development that you want to focus on, it's, I don't know, it's a choice between what is somebody else doing and what can I do to make sure that I what are my priorities and what can I do to make sure that I get to where I need to get to. And we have a lot that we're doing and we should be doing to within our own societies.
Yeah, there are a lot of really interesting questions there, aren't there? And I was going to, if we'd had time, and I think our time is running a little short, I was going to ask you to sort of follow up on your point about what one country might say about another, and come to this question of sort of international justice, where of course countries have come together and set up international criminal court or the East African Court of Human Rights, or a range of international courts, of course, whose job is where national justice fails, to bring in some international justice.
Yes.
I said I'm not sure we've got time to go into that in any depth.
Okay.
But maybe a very brief comment on that, and then I wanted to come back to Tanzania and your sort of role as the sort of, I think I'm right in saying that you are or have been the sort of chairperson of the Tanzania Women Lawyers Association. So maybe one concluding comment on this international justice question, and let's come to the gender.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes, hear you fine. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So as a concluding comment, so I studied international law and human rights, and as you said, at Liverpool, and I remember when I studied this, we really focused on the international courts, international justice. We focused on, so I basically went through all the structures and how they operate and why they're there and how important it is to have them, even the international treaties, but also the UN system, the UN organs, the UN agencies, and all of that. And I think it is really important to have these structures, and these structures are there so that if all else fails, then we move on into these structures so that they can help us to achieve justice. But I do think being here now and doing the work that I do, when you have so much going on in terms of access to justice within your community, and you're working to ensure that you have you have a level of, you reach a certain level of where you can say, now we have addressed certain challenges we had in the past, and we have we have addressed some issues, and whether individually, institutionally, within communities, and all of that. your priorities change a little bit, and you look more into what can I do so that the information I have, the knowledge I have, the understanding, the education, the experiences that I have can then be utilized to really support the community that probably needs this support more than anybody else. And I think those systems are there because they are important when needed, and as much as sometimes they are criticized for their fairness as well. So as far as international justice is concerned, where there is a need for international justice, that is when you see the importance of having those systems there, those international courts or the systems that are in place. But in terms of everyday justice and the lives that we live every day, we don't really come into contact, or we don't really see how they affect what we're doing until there is a need for something like that. And for a society like ours in Tanzania, as peaceful as we are, we focus more on the needs of the communities that we work with. Yeah. So try to
Great,
summarize.
thank you. Thank you. Yes. Well, let's come to this question of gender, because that's clearly important to you, and you've touched on it, a lot during this sort of this past hour. And so, what would you say? What are the main challenges in making progress on this agenda from your? You've got a lot of experience on this. What are the best way we can make progress on that?
It's a very good question, and I think I could probably have a whole day on this, but I will limit it to a few minutes as much as I can. I think we have made progress, first and foremost, and I'll talk about not globally to some extent in Tanzania, to a lot of extent. I remember some of the issues are still the same issues we're grappling with now that we grappled with maybe 10 years ago. But we have made progress in the sense that how these issues are viewed now in Tanzania are not the same way they were viewed 10 years ago. So that's some of the progress that we have made. It's no longer looked at as strange when you say, you see, even in leadership positions, women getting appointed. I mean, having a female vice president in Tanzania, it is not something we even thought about 10 years ago. But this also filters down in terms of leadership positions and things like that. But even the way that equality is viewed, the way that gender is viewed is very different from where it was. Having said that, there are still a lot of challenges. And I think some of these challenges are based on traditions, values, cultures, and so they're embedded within our society. And like any other society, these have always been there, will always be there. So how do we address them? I think the more that we have a multi-sector approach to this, the better. That we look at this, and I remember I had a meeting with somebody very high level from one of the ministries, and I was saying, we were talking about the issue of gender-based violence. I think it was sexual gender-based violence, and he said to me, I know you've been working in this for a very long time. I know you're passionate about this, and I know there's a lot that has been done. What do you think is key? What can be done to address this issue? And I said, a lot of time, oftentimes, and goes the same way for the gender issues, women empowerment issues, we work in silos. Everybody is working really hard to try to address the same issue, but in their own little corner. And so the impact of it is very small. But also, we also have to make sure, as much as we're doing what we're doing, we can't do it in isolation. We can't be sitting on the outside screaming. I was saying to somebody yesterday, if we sit on this side screaming about at the wall, the other person on that side can't hear what we're saying. So somehow we have to be sitting on those tables where those decisions are made and address it systemically and saying that these are the changes that need to be made, and this is why the changes have to be made. And it's not always that people set out to how can I say, people don't set out, they don't come, they don't plan and say, now we're going to make sure that there is no equality, there's no gender equality. But it happens that way because of systems, structures, processes. It could be that this is what has always been done. So somehow we have to find a way to address those issues by making sure that we're challenging, and we are there to not necessarily to challenge, but to say there is another way to do this. Does it have to happen that way? And the law is really important in this. If you look at a lot of the policies, guidelines, laws that are in existence, they have been there for like a very long time, and nobody has ever questioned why they're there. And sometimes when you ask the question, why are these laws here, people look at you and say, I don't know, we don't know why they're here. Oh, so can we change this? Yeah, of course it can be changed. I find that somebody was asking me, how do you manage to penetrate and work with government in the way that you do, even though you're from the civil society? And I say, first of all, you have to get ownership. You have to get buy-in. We understand that the government has the mandate. You cannot say that you want to make a change without actually having engagement and involvement and participation and collaboration, cooperation with the people who are actually mandated to do what you're trying to do. So if you want that to happen, then you have to make sure that your agenda is on the table, you're speaking to the right people, and you're also, even the person on the other side also has to see why it's important and what value it adds to what it is that they're doing. And a lot of times you can trace this all the way directly to economic empowerment, to social cohesion, to community strengthening. You can really point straight to a government development, poverty reduction agenda that actually exists, that this will address this particular issue. If we do this, you have to speak a language that person you're speaking to can understand. You cannot try to address issues by one complaining without a solution. You cannot try to address issue by criticizing without offering an alternative. And as I say, we cannot assume that people know what you're thinking, or that they do what they do because they set out to do that. They probably set out to do something totally different, and as a consequence, this happened. So you can redress that. You can find a way to say, okay, I know you wanted to do this, but you know you can achieve that even more by doing it this way, and by doing it this way, these people will benefit from it, which will then give you these kinds of outcomes. So we have to really um, think about how we address, and maybe we need to change a little bit our approach. We need to change a little bit the agenda, so that the agenda becomes our agenda, everybody's agenda. It should never be seen, gender should never be seen as a women's issues. I believe somebody said women's rights are human rights. If we're going to talk about human rights, these are our rights, are people's rights, then the focus should be, how do we attain the highest level of human rights?
Yeah, Lulu, great. I think that's a great point to end on. I want to thank you for this interview. It's been really fascinating. I've really enjoyed it. I'm sure that our listeners have. Looks like you have. We could have kept talking about this for a long time. So thank you very much indeed. And I think this is now for me to pass over to you for in a couple of weeks' time to pick up the baton and interview somebody in your turn. Any final words?
No, I totally have enjoyed this, and as you've said, this is a conversation we could have probably not just a day, a whole week. These are issues that are very dear and near to my heart. So I've thoroughly enjoyed this. I think there's a lot to be said. As I said, you cannot really separate human rights from, justice issues. So there is a lot to be said there. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you everyone for listening in. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.